Just doing a sound check. Sounds off still.
I can hear you here. There you go.
I gotta be honest, then I'd be around.
Fair enough, fair enough, fair enough.
Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, it is 1:33. I'd like to get started. A bit of a taskmaster here, but Kristen, have we gone live yet? I don't see it on the screen. Oh, perfect. Good, we're in good shape then. So ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territories of the Hukapuskasat First Nations and the Tashot First Nations. And I acknowledge that the committee members are joining in from, especially those that are zooming in with us, from other traditional territories of the Nuu-chah-nulth people. We're very grateful for the generosity to share this beautiful land. Notice to attendees and delegates that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube on the regional website, district website. And I'd like to start off with introductions. We'll go clockwise, starting with myself. My name is Bob Beckett, and I represent Area A Bamfield. And I'll turn it over to Daniel, please.
Good afternoon. I'm Daniel Saya. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer for the ACRD.
Thank you, Daniel.
Harley Wiley, Tashot Council Member.
Thank you.
Thomas Pepin, CEO of the Island Corridor Foundation.
Thomas.
Hello, everybody. Aklama Klois Hupachasak Nuu-chah-nulth. My English name is Judith Sayers, and I am on this committee. I never attended a meeting yet, except when we were in the crisis modes, but I'm also president of the Nuu-chah-nulth Tribal Council.
And sorry, is it Judith?
Yes,
Thank you very much, Judith.
and I haven't been in the regional district for about 20 years, but I was on the board for 5 years. Some time ago.
Oh, well, welcome back.
Thanks.
And
Okay.
over to you, Mike.
Thank you. I'm Mike Sparrow, Regional Director, Representative for Cherry Creek.
I'm Jolene Dick, CEO, Alberni Valley Chamber of Commerce, and on the board for Alberni Valley Tourism Association.
Hi, Zoran Knezovic, CEO, Port Alberni Port Authority.
Good afternoon, Ken McCray, Freeman of the city for Port Alberni, and I represent the regional district.
Cindy Solda, City of Port Alberni, and I represent the city.
John McNabb, I'm Director, Delegate at Large.
Thank you, John, and perhaps you'll consider coming back at next election or throwing your hat in the ring. And so we'll go we'll go to those that are joining us on Zoom. And we'll start with Marilyn, if you don't mind, please, Marilyn.
Good afternoon, everyone. Marilyn McEwen, Mayor of Ucluelet.
Thank you. And Josh.
Josh Jenkins, Executive Director of the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce, calling in from the Ucluelet territory.
Thank you. Samantha.
Hello from Tlaloquit, Tallahassee. I'm Samantha Hackett, the Executive Director of the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce on the committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Arnie.
Yeah, Aaron Elias. I'm on the board of the Port Authority. Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon. Dan, all the way from Tofino.
Dan Law, Mayor of Tofino on Tlaloquit, traditional territory.
Thanks, Dan. Livana.
Good afternoon, Lavana Mastrangelo from Ucluelet First Nation, coming in from Campbell River, traditional territory of Hamalko, Wewakai, Wewakum, and Director on the ACRD. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Colin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Colin Cosman from Mosaic. I'm a land use forester calling in from the Cathet and the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation.
Thank you, Colin. And I think the last person, unless I stand to be corrected, is staff member Kristen, who's in her office taking minutes from for this meeting. So thank you, Kristen, for your help today. So if I could, I'd like to go to item number 2, and that's approval of the agenda, assuming there's nothing else to add to the agenda today. Go ahead, John.
Motion to approve the agenda.
And seconded by Cindy. Thank you very much for that. All in favor? Motion is passed. And just because we do have some new faces at the table, I will identify my informality here. When we first came together as a committee, we decided to go with first names as opposed to last names and titles and all the rest of it. So, you know, I don't mean to offend anyone if we aren't formal, but the idea is let's roll up our sleeves, get to work, and put some of that formality behind. Item number 3 is declarations. Any conflicts of interest? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 4, minutes. Transportation Advisory Committee meeting held July 30th, 2024. And the motion is that the minutes of the Transportation Advisory Committee meeting held on July 30th, 24 be adopted. Would someone like to make that motion? Cindy makes that motion. Thank you. Seconded by Mike. Thank you very much, Mike. Any comments, discussions? All in favor? That is passed. Thank you very much. We have no petitions, delegations, or presentations. That's item number 5. Item number 6, there is no correspondence for action or information. Item number 7, requests for decisions. There are none. Item number 8, we have 2 items in number 8. We'll start off with 8A, which is a verbal presentation by Thomas Bevan. Welcome again, Thomas, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to look to my chair, Judith Sayers, to start us off, actually.
Hello, everybody. Good to be here and to talk about something that I've devoted well over 20 years of my life. My Uncle Ken there pulled me in way back when I was chief at Hoopajesset, and we were part of the founding people who brought the rail together way back in Cowichan, and we were part of it before it became the Allan Corder Foundation. So as you know, we've been working through the years with a lot of barriers raised to stop us from proceeding, and I think the biggest thing in the end was getting the funding that we needed from both the federal and provincial governments. At one point, we had both. We had about 100 million on the table from BC and Canada, and Canada, when the lawsuit was begun by Snunawis, they pulled back their funding and told us to resolve it, even though they were the ones that took the land in the first place, and it was really their problem. So over the years, trying to get funding, even though we tried to break it up into incremental, I think we were looking for 7.5 million, and we got that commitment from the province, but not from the federal government. So it's been ongoing. Via Rail took the cars off the island, and so we've had, any number of things happen. But I guess the most critical, of course, was the win. Well, it wasn't really a win in the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal said that Cenawas did have a reversionary right, and if we couldn't come up with the funding in 18 months, they'd have their land back. And so, of course, no commitment from the federal or provincial governments, and their land was returned to them as is. And so we're trying to find our way around that, bringing everybody together to see if there is a shared vision for the rail. Is there a way we can go around Cenawas? Is there a way we can work with Cenawas? And so we're looking at all options. We've had an all First Nations meeting trying to determine how we could do this. I've always wanted to see all the First Nations running a rail. And tourism was the big thing way back when, was to bring tourists into the valley, to go to all of our beautiful places that we all have here. And so trying to bring everybody together to see if there's a way we can save the railway, because we have 5 other First Nations that the railway actually runs through their reserves, and with the reversionary interest there. The biggest, I guess, issue there is whether or not we can bring the federal government to the table. Because as you know, taking up tracks, cleaning up environmental issues along the rail, whatever that could be. We got creosote rail tracks. We have, there could be oil spills, who knows? Could be a really costly endeavor for a First Nation to have to take on. So, if the federal government doesn't come to the table, and this is basically what we said around the table, is that it's going to be really hard to be giving land back, if that's what the decision is. And as you know, Island Quarter Foundation is 50% First Nations, 50% regional districts. And the Constitution as it now is to keep rail in place from Victoria to Courtenay, Parksville into Port Alberni. That was always the vision, and that's what's in the Constitution. If we were to change that, it would take a vote of everybody, all the members of the society, to change that. So we're trying this joint visioning to figure out, is there a way, or what can we do to save the railway? We all know that if we have to widen the highway on the island, what a disaster that would be. We all want to reduce greenhouse gases and take some of those trucks off the road. I mean, those are some of the basic reasons from the very beginning that I got involved, apart from tourism and, not wanting to, taking some of these trucks off the road that come into the valley all the time. I remember one meeting with all the mayors and the federal minister, and they were talking about the hundreds of thousands of dollars it takes that they put into their city streets for all those big trucks, like the damage those trucks do continually on there. And, and they were very impressed. But unfortunately, we just never have had that political commitment for the island rail. And I think that's what we've been missing. And now you've got the provincial government scrambling all over the place and say, oh yeah, we support rail. We want to run the railway, they said at UBCM. And, they put this 18 million in without even talking to the Island Quarter Foundation, or even, trying to figure out what we should do. It's always been the province that wanted to do that. In fact, we did know at one point that John Horgan wanted to just expropriate the railway and to take it over. But I told him through his contacts that he would have the biggest scandal in his career if he ever had to do that. Anyway, I don't know if that's what did it, but they just didn't expropriate it. But they still, talk about the corridors if it's a public owned asset, and it's not. Regional districts and First Nations own it through the Island Quarter Foundation. And I always used to say that we're one of the richest landowners on Vancouver Island, $360 million when we acquired that piece. And that, we should be given that due. So anyway, that's kind of what we're trying to do. We're trying to find our way forward with some of these challenges that have been in our way. we know, ACRD, City of Port Alberni, I've always been supportive of the railway and really appreciate that. Hoopa Jessup is strongly in favor, and Harley can talk about Sashant, but, anyway, I'm just gonna hand it over to Thomas to talk about some of the other things that we're working on. But thank you for the opportunity to come and present.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. I'm still quite new to the role, about 5 months in. I think I'm in a good audience, though, to say that this is my 7th time in Port Alberni, so really loving it here. Thanks so much for your hospitality. But one of the best parts of this job so far is the opportunity to go up and down the island over and over again. We've been in the Capital Regional District about 5 times, and Comox about 5, and same with Cowichan. And I'm a new proud Nanaimo resident, so I spend a lot of time downtown Nanaimo and walking up and down the corridor. So it's a real privilege to be here, and I'm a planner by training and passion, coming to this from BC Housing before. So see this as an opportunity for transit-oriented development. And most importantly, as Judith was saying, First Nations need to be the main benefactor and a decider of what happens here. And so that's somewhat the role that I've been brought into here, is to bring our members together. And the Shared Vision project that Judith mentioned, which was started by Modi about 10 months ago, being 18 million provided to our 14 different First Nation members in 5 regional districts, is well underway, and the ACRD has hired their consultant HDR. We had a meeting earlier this morning on that with the working group here, and these working groups are happening concurrently up and down the island, and the Island Corridor Foundation is trying very much to be that connective tissue, so that there's not 19 different visions of the corridor, but rather kind of a collective, co-created, thoughtful approach on how this corridor can be used to everyone's benefit, hopefully in a connected fashion. And very happy to speak to some of the early indications of what the different parties are finding in terms of what are commonalities that we hope can bring people together. And particularly in this table, we might want to talk about the relevance to the alternative route that is sorely needed in the Alberni area, and Highway 4 being a huge problem and vulnerability to climate change and disaster planning. And so there's been some good study on how this corridor might even serve as a kind of a stopgap emergency tool in the toolbox of many different things with regards to access and fire management, etc. So some pretty relevant things there that we'd be happy to speak to if that's of interest to the group. So without, I think that's probably a good place to end the formal part of the talk, but if we want to have a bit of a roundtable, be very happy to discuss and answer any questions.
Thank you, Judith and Thomas. I think it would be very appropriate, and if you don't mind sharing, how could that section of rail be used in the event of a road closure? So I'll start it off with that, and then I'm going to be looking around the room and on Zoom to see if there's additional questions or comments. So yes, go ahead, Judith.
I guess I'm on. I think, ideally, we could even run a regular rail service on from Parksville into Port Alberni. There'd be some work and, bridges, there'd be some work that would need to be done. That would be kind of neat to be able to do that and to work on our tourism. It's a small train, small track, but it's possible. But, during the fire, we were asked if we could run some cars into Port Alberni with refrigerated trucks, because as you know, getting medicine in refrigerated truck just wasn't happening because they didn't want to do that logging road, which I had to do a few times. But anyway, and then I think they ended up helicoptering things in. And so, I mean, it's possible to make it, I mean, it'd be a better corridor than it is going over into, up Comox Way, or the Mosaic Way. Horn Lake, that's the road. That one's pretty bad, but the rail would be pretty good. So I think, it is an emergency road if needed and, could be worked on. So I think there are quite a few options. Like this is an invaluable corridor. I mean, it connects places. It's got the fiber optic cable in it, and it's something that's worth retaining. But again, that's got to be the shared vision of everyone going forward.
Thank you.
I
And
can add a couple points to that too. In terms of the immediate emergency possibilities of it too, I think there's been some creative ideas by the consultant HDR brought on by ACRD around even a high rail emergency service. And so the exact degree of the condition of the track needs to be reevaluated. I think some estimates were done about 10 years ago to bring some type of train service back. That cost it was not small, but it wasn't also enormous for a more slower rudimentary service. But another possibility that would be an order of magnitude smaller in terms of scope would just be to have the corridor cleared of brush, which it's currently very much overgrown past McLean Mill. I don't think brush clearing has happened in about 20 years. Daniel, Penny, and members from Hoopachesset and Tishat, we've been out on the high rail to McLean Mill, but can't get any further because of the condition of the brush. And so with a brush clearing exercise, as well as some safety recertification of the trestles, which would not have to be replaced, but there might be some slight safety recertification in terms of getting a 10-ton truck on those. Those are all kind of, I think, possibilities that could be much lower hanging fruit than this kind of bigger project of a rail, which doesn't also have to be an enormously costly project if it's kept at a certain weight and speed that would be conducive to the conditions.
thank you. Good response. Can I, Judith, get you to turn your mic off for me, please? And I have Cindy and then Ken.
You sure it was only 10 years ago that this study had been done from Port Alberni? Because it feels like 15, because when I was sitting on the island corridor back in the day, during Ken's days, they had no plans to come to Port Alberni. They wanted to have the rail going from north to south, and it maybe one day they'd come to Port Alberni, they said. And it was really frustrating because when I came back to report it to the council, actually it was to the ACRD, and saying, yeah, we're going to keep putting money into rail, but it's not going to come here at this moment in time. They have no plans. They just want north and south at the time. So I just am playing a little devil's advocate here, and they didn't find it feasible to come to Port Alberni at that time. But I'm just kind of curious if we looking at it as an emergency route out of our community, what about the people that have the families and they need their vehicles too? I mean, obviously we can't put it. What are we looking at? It would be really nice to see some kind of plan to see how that whole picture would look. And are we just looking for supplies? I mean, what are we looking at? It would be really nice to see a plan.
We can look on the specific timing of the last study. I'm not sure if it was 10 or 15 years ago, but there was an in-depth condition assessment of all of the trestles and bridges of the entire corridor and the kind of remaining lifespan of them. And the Port Alberni segment, even though it is one of the more overgrown segments, it was actually one of the last kind of areas to be not utilized for economic purposes. So I've been told more anecdotally, but we can look into the substantive consultant evidence for it that quite a lot of investment was made by Rail America, keeping up the state of the corridor until they left, which I guess was about 15 or 20 years ago. So the ties themselves and the kind of structural condition of the foundation of the trestles is in a state that could at least with minor repairs and then intensive clearing of the brush, a truck service could be established. And so providing that to individuals on a private basis, probably not, but for emergency personnel, also water. And HDR, the consultant, has come up with some examples that CN's using with they call it a Poseidon program in Alberta and whatnot, where there's high rail trucks that can pull tankers also on high rail to fire zones. So I think that could be another really great tool in the toolbox. Again, it's not the answer to all emergency problems, but in the context of resiliency, having many different diversified options, I think this could be really low-hanging fruit for emergency personnel services, refrigeration trucks, like Judith said. The big problem when the fire happened last time was that the corridor was totally unprepared. So even though Modi was asking, can we run a truck down the corridor, because it was so overgrown, it absolutely was not in the cards at that time. So in order to have it as a possibility, the cutting would have to happen prior.
It would be really nice to have a business plan, to see a business plan and cost projections and stuff like that, and from A to B. I would welcome to see it. I'm not against it, but I would like to see a business plan, how it would play out here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken, sir.
Yeah, just a few comments. So it really started in the mid-90s, the rail situation in Port Alberni. I was the senior vice president of the big union in the pulp mill, and I was the chief negotiator for the province. And actually, the company came to me and they said, hey, guess what? Rail America is thinking of pulling out of Port Alberni, and we'd like you to be on the team with us to see if we can get them to stay here. It was complete chaos. They had made a real mess of the railroad, haven't put a cent into the railroad, hadn't done any. And so we lost it. So I think we were pushing 50 rail cars out of Port Alberni. Everything went back on the highway. You can imagine what a mess. It's been a mess ever since. It hasn't changed. And so that's where we started. And then when I became mayor, Sue Cabell came to see me in the office and he says, hey, Ken, there's a bid out for taking up the railroad between here and Parksville. The contracts are gone out. He says, you guys should see what you're doing. And we hear there's going to be a big meeting in Cowichan to deal with it. So we were never invited. So Ken Watson and I, who was the city manager, we just went to the meeting. I remember when I walked in, they said, well, you're not a delegate. I says, I'm a delegate. I represent the people in the Alberni Valley. I'm the mayor of Port Alberni. We're part of the rail situation. You people haven't recognized this. And at that time, they had all the big politicians there from the federal, provincial government and the chief from Cowichan. And I remember they were all saying, this is our railroad. You know, Vancouver Island became part of BC, all that kind of stuff. And the head chief from Cowichan got up. He says, none of your business. All that land is ours. And that's when we started the situation we got on for the Island Corridor Foundation. And I've been on there ever since, representing the rail. And, you know, our thing was that you could take a passenger train from Victoria, come into Port Alberni, stay overnight, take a cruise ship or a small ship down the inlet, go to Tofino, Ucluelet, Pacific Ring Park, see part of our area, and then take the cruise back to Victoria. That's always been our dream. And also for industry, you know, it's a big thing for industry. I worked in industry my whole life in the paper mill. When we had the shutdown here with the fire, it was chaos. You know, a roll of paper coming out of there is pretty expensive, just one roll. And they can't take it. They sure couldn't take it on the southern road because the damage is so much. And with food grade, and they're spending money on food grade as we speak. You know, it's a pretty nice product. And we have the Sand Group probably make the best kind of product man ever divides for wood. And you can't send that stuff on a road that's going through the southern way we had. We need something different. And the railroad would be a perfect situation getting product out of here. But we had looked at that in the past, and I think we should really look at it seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. John?
So I've been around the edges of this project for some time as well. I was a delegate from the regional district assistant or for a number of years. And I just have to say that you really have to be a rock climber, because this project is something that just has so much resistance to it, so many valleys and pitfalls. It's, I mean, it's of great importance, and to succeed would be a landmark achievement. And I mean, I don't know how, Judith, you keep your energy up, your spirit up with it, because it's got to be upsetting, demoralizing when you get the reaction that would tie Vancouver Island together, and it would create opportunities that are just simply not available at this moment. So I salute you for that. I certainly support the movement forward, and I know that if it's ever achieved, that it will be a financial boon for the Alberni Valley, the West Coast, and everybody else. But good work. Just got to keep on hammering at it. Thanks.
Thanks, John. We have Zoran, Jolene, and Arnie. And I'm starting with Zoran, please.
Thanks. And we have maybe to add to it, we have young leader right now at the corridor, and we hope she's going to achieve that monumental stuff. I'm sure there's a lot of potential. And I echo that it will be really very beneficial for the valley and for the island as well too, to maintain that rail corridor and use it that one day. But maybe just to add, or not add, but to sort of provide more clarity in regards to possibility using it as an emergency route. What do you think that will take the time, the amount of money, and is that how viable that option is for us, for this committee to consider that and potentially include that in our planning. So as Cindy alluded, a business plan, or I'm not sure if it's a business plan, or at least some form of estimate of what would that take, the cost, money, and time. Thanks.
Yeah, I think a business plan for the specific case of an emergency route would be absolutely paramount and a good use of time and resource. And I think in terms of an emergency route, having the potential simplest option as the starting point, which I would see as a high rail option for 10-ton trucks, and to not put numbers that to hold us to, we need to have the study by the professionals in order to get those numbers. But I can say that it is by and large the brush that is the problem to the high rail access. There are some degree of trestle works that would need to be also repaired. But for a truck service, it would be an order of magnitude less than a rail service to get a truck onto those trestles again. But the most important thing is the brush. And so right now we are clearing brush from Victoria to Courtenay. I think we'll have spent $600,000 by the end of the year on that. We're working with Tishat First Nation on an estimate for clearing a part of the corridor and in terms of their mapping project that they would like to be pursuing in the new year. And so we're getting an estimate of cost to work with Tishat on that brush clearing. But it would be quite plausibly less than that $600,000 number just to clear the brush from Port Alberni to Coombs is by and large the section that's most overgrown.
Thank you. Before I turn it over to Jolene, I'm going to look to Daniel and, I think we'll finish the discussion. We may come back to the cost estimate, business plan, whatever you want to call it. But I'm thinking that this committee may wish to consult with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to identify that this committee is interested in having the ministry work with the Island Corridor Foundation to take a look at whether or not they would financially support that initiative and or at the very least discuss the value and benefit of having that work done in advance of carrying on. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, we can certainly, I can share that with Michael just informally and see what process he would recommend we follow to get that done. Of course, with an election going on provincially, mum's going to be the word until all that clears. And this is also information that we'll bring back to our rail committee as we work through the process there as well. I think the information that's being shared here is not new to the rail committee, but again, we have two different groups working towards dangerously similar ends. And just want to make sure that we bridge that gap in communication to make sure that we have that awareness. So, but I've made note of that, and I'll follow up with the ministry staff.
So you don't feel we need to do a motion for that? That'll just be an informal check with Michael.
A motion is always good because in the records reflect that there's a motion from the committee. Sorry, I wasn't clear on that question. So yes, if you make a motion to that extent, always better for staff to have motions.
Thank you. So what I'd like to suggest is we go through the speakers list, Jolene, Arnie, and Harley, and then we can come back to a potential motion then if that works. Jolene, please.
Thank you, Thomas and Judith, for the update. I have a series of questions that I'm sure you do not have an answer to right now and would probably be in a business plan. But just for clarity and for my understanding, if an emergency happened next month, I'm curious, are there existing high rail trucks available? First, do the trestles need to be reevaluated before a high rail truck goes and makes a destination from Coombs to Port Alberni?
Yes, there needs to be an engineering current assessment of the condition and whether or not any repairs for a high rail weighted classification would be needed.
Awesome. And can you remind us the length of track from the other side to Port Alberni, whether that's Coombs or Parksville?
I believe it's about 70 kilometers from Coombs to Port Alberni.
Perfect. And then say 6 months from now, we get, we hit the lottery, we have all our evaluations and permits and everything. Is there existing high rail trucks that would be able to be deployed in the event of an emergency?
I believe that our current rail partner, SVI, Southern Rail Vancouver Island, has a tanker truck as well as 3 F-150 high rail trucks and I believe 3 10-ton trucks and as well as a boom truck. So there are a degree of high rails on the island already. Whether or not some type of agreement with their larger parent company, Southern Rail, which is based out of New Westminster, which would have other equipment that could be made available with some degree of lag because it would have to be barged over, but whether or not those could be deployed in emergency could be a question, or whether or not additional equipment would need to be on standby. I think kind of like the oil response units that are set up around like Nanaimo and Port Alberni, it could be a kind of similar type of facility. And I think it really could be very interesting in terms of emergency response throughout the island, because this Highway 4 isn't the only bottleneck. If something would happen in the Malahat, this same unit could be deployed. And the nice thing about a high rail is if it can go on both the rail and the highway, and some folks kind of say about whether or not which one is more vulnerable, the rail or the highway. And I think it's kind of 6 of one, half the dozen of the other. And the whole point of emergency planning is that you have backups. And so with a high rail, it's a great system because it has both capabilities. So if the highway is blown out, then you can go on the high rail. And if the high rail is blown out, you can go on the highway. And so it really is, I think, quite a good redundant solution for the case of the unknown.
Thank you. And I have one more question. Okay. Is it within the Island Corridor Foundation's like strategic planning to consider these routes? Because all this work needs to be done and it will be expensive. And I assume we're going to knock on Modi's door as well for some of this. So I'm just curious where this lies in the queue of priorities and capacity to deliver answering some of these questions to make a business plan for an alternative emergency route using rail.
I might look to Daniel a little bit for a follow-up to this. In terms of the ACRD component, because I would say that it has arisen as part of the consultants' ideas. What we've been seeing and are quite encouraged by with the Modi shared vision work right now is actually kind of even taking a step further back to talk about principles and values of the corridor, potentially resiliency and redundancy being one of those values, but not getting into the weeds of the specific meat and potato costs and implementation that is seen at a later phase. And so whether or not that work can fit into the existing scopes of work or would need to be dovetailed or come in addition to, I think is a question for ACRD, but then also our other partners in Cowichan and Comox in the CRD as well.
I'll just echo that. And this is information that I guess I have the pleasure of being on both projects. And so I can and will relay message back and forth. So we have our advisory committee here in the Alberni Valley. And so we'll make sure that we're sharing information, and we like making sure that before taking any major steps or altering or adding anything to the scope of our work, that we have that discussion to make sure it's in scope with the committee whose work we're looking to complete. But then there's a provincial working group, and there is a regional district working group. There are many sub and side committees, and a lot of this is just about good dialogue and sharing the various things that are going on in each one of the regions. And so I know Kristen is taking notes. I am as well. I'll make sure that I do share that back with the various groups, so that at the end of the day, as a vision starts developing, we can be in step with that and add these elements that we see adding value to our community at the appropriate time.
I'm not stepping over or missing anyone, but I just want to go back to Judith, because I think, Judith, you want to respond to that specific question.
Yes, I just wanted to say that, the province did make that 18 million available to First Nations and regional district to do the work that needed to be done. So how hopeful going to Modi and that is, I don't know. But I'm sure that's going to be the first thing they're going to say to you. But, over the years, ICF has invested money in business plans, strategic plans. I think we have another strategy session coming up. We've done it over and over and over again. And because, they're dated, we do need to update them. In fact, Cindy, when you were talking, we had gotten 7.5 million approved by the province, and they insisted that the first 500,000 be spent on an assessment of the rail, especially the trestles and bridges, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, how long ago was Christy Clark? You know, it's been a while. So we do need to update these because the years and the weathering and those sorts of things have happened. But it's certainly something, you know, that we could bring to the provincial tables. We need to do this, you know, and use the political muscle to try and get more funding, because I think it's a real important questions that you're asking and that we need to be aware of and to help. Because it just, the alternate routes out of Victoria, out of Alberni, so many places are just so necessary and so needed. And I don't think it's become more important than the last little while. So anyway, just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Thank you both for that. Arnie, please, on Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Most of the questions have been answered since I put my hand up, but I will go over a couple of points. So I've been involved in this since 2009, when Bruce gave me his first call was to me when I was running the Center for Sustainable Transportation at the University of Winnipeg. And I said, do a vision study. So I'm very pleased to see that a vision study is going ahead. I do think that's the most important one that should have been done first. But I do think the state of the rails assessment was, I think, around 2010, 2011, if I recall. And I'm wondering if you have plans, and echoing quite a few other questions, that assessment needs to be done again to see where we're at, so that we understand the capability moving forward. That's just to emphasize that one point.
Thanks very much. And thank you for your patience, Harley. I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thanks. Yeah, just to touch on some of the stuff that was brought up earlier. The All Nations meeting, I got a number of things out of that, and Thomas and Judith have covered a majority of those. We heard the pros from the First Nations that are in favor of it. We heard the negative, the cons from those that are not, and understood why. I think the important thing to get the message to bring from that is we understood each other, and we that want it understand those that don't and the reasons for it. And by the same token, those that don't want it understand First Nations that do want it and what our reasons are. And part of that is with having an emergency route for Port Alberni to Parksville, Nanaimo, and a complete island corridor rail if possible. The other thing that came out of that is there was a unanimous decision to have and want a follow-up meeting to this so that we can discuss it further as First Nations invested in this Island Corridor Foundation and what it means to us, and to find a solution. And I think that fits well within what federal government was saying in the past on, okay, First Nations aren't in agreement after the Sundalis thing, organize it, get it together, and then come back to us. Well, I think that's what we just did with the All Nations meeting, and we're wanting to do a follow-up. So I see that as promising. The other thing is that for me was something I never expected to come from that meeting was an agreement, a recommendation, a motion put forward for First Nations, Island Corridor Foundation, and provincial government to travel to Ottawa to remind them, you have an obligation, you have a responsibility, we need you at the table. So for me, that was big. And I'm looking forward to more discussion on that, because I think the more that we understand of what each other needs and that we meet and talk about it, the stronger the group becomes. So I see hope. And in the past, I've told Thomas that I'd had a chance to meet his predecessor, Larry, and I really admire his knowledge of experience and of how to move this forward. And I think, and I told Thomas, the thing that I really admire that he brings to this is some hope and some enthusiasm, because I think that it's needed now with the right mix of people bringing the right stakeholders to the table. And I'm in agreement with the business plan being needed. And that also fits in with something I was saying earlier today. When we have consultants, whether it's ACRD, Cowichan, Duncan, or elsewhere, that have consultants coming in, it's often focused on just the economic benefits to the non-Indigenous community, the tonnage of goods that can be shipped, the amount of revenue it can generate, but there's never any mention of how it's going to benefit First Nations. And I said, it needs more than just we support First Nations participating in this. We need to work together to find ways to make that happen. Because it's easy to forget that we have lived for centuries, for generations with the oppression of the Indian Act, and we could not even legally pursue land claims, let alone have financial institutions invest in us to start businesses, partnerships. So we're in a stage now in this society evolving that we can actually work together politically and in business. So I think that we need to do that. The other thing that I mentioned this morning is I'd recommended that Indigenous Tourism of BC be invited to be a resource person and be there to help First Nations that aren't aware of or haven't considered tourism options on how they could start a business and what kind of revenue it might generate. And I think that it was too soon to this meeting to make that possible. However, I hope that we can do that in a follow-up meeting. The other thing is, I think that I'll leave it to the consultant group that was heading this and to Thomas, find a way to bring to the table what economic benefits there can be to First Nations, what business, what investment, what ways of starting First Nations businesses that could be brought to communities. And in explaining that to some of these communities, I said, well, if you look at it as not just having a business and having the possibility of customers, think of a railway delivering those customers right to your front door. And I think that a follow-up meeting will have a lot of good things on the agenda. And the business plan is an important part of it because so far, I don't see a lot of time spent on this is how this will benefit First Nations. And I think that the business plan will help us identify that and to help move this forward. We've talked about expanding the railway, and I know with the Alberni Pacific Railway, the request for proposals, the RFP, was keen on including UNDRIP and DRIPA legislation to move it forward. And I think that anything that we do in the future needs to have that as well, so that everybody, every stakeholder involved with this understands what UNDRIP and DRIPA is, so that we can know we are not working in isolation with some people having part of the information and part of the agreement and buy-in, but make sure that everybody does, rather than, yes, we at ACRD do, we at Island Corridor Foundation do, but perhaps City Hall, perhaps the Historical Society, perhaps Alberni Pacific Railway aren't aware that we are all following these steps to make it successful. So that's one other thing that I think that we could be doing and should be doing. But the other aspect that was being brought to the Alberni Pacific Railway is not just can a business case be developed where it's viable to bring this back, but the consulting firm went one step further and said, we're looking at a way to make this a year-round financial success, which I had never considered. So those are things that are coming up lately that I think are adding some hope to keep moving this forward. Yeah, myself, I'd like to see this happen. Our nation, our chief, our council are looking at it as if this brings benefit to us and our neighboring tribes and the city, that's great. But we need to have everybody on board if it's going to be possible. Otherwise, it's not a good investment of time and money. So I support the work that Island Corridor Foundation is doing, the work that was done by the people that founded it, like Judith and many others, some of you sitting at the table. And I'm relatively new to this process, but I'm in support of it and I'll do what I can to help move it forward too. There are some positive things to look at, and I hope I touched on some of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could perhaps look or agree to a motion. And I've just been penciling something for Daniel to reach out to Michael at Modi for discussions regarding the steps or processes necessary to determine the value and status of the rail line for high rail 10-ton truck emergency something. Yeah, can we work on that? Does everybody understand what we're trying to focus on? Moved by Ken, seconded by Zoran. Any discussions, comments? Go ahead, Cindy.
Just a quick comment. Now, Modi, we're supposed to be getting report back in December, I believe, about emergency routes. And then we were supposed to put a business, if we wanted another route out of our community, we were supposed to have a business case, come up with a business plan or a business case, however you want to put it. But so would this motion also be part of the December report? Unlikely, because there's not enough time, because, you know, again, I'm playing devil's advocate here regarding, we're not going to get both, I'm sure, you know, so how are we going to do, like, it would be nice to have them both together, the benefits of both, right? Just putting it out there.
Thank you. I think that can be part of the discussion that Daniel has with Michael, and we are going to be discussing next steps in the next agenda item. I see John had his hand up as well.
So I'm just a little worried about taking their focus away from what we want immediate answers to. And they seem to be difficult to retain focus at any given time, i.e. Cathedral Grove. So I think we want to be quite succinct with the motion itself, tighten it up, make it sure that we keep it a parameter that they're not going to go out spinning away from what we originally tasked them to be. That makes any sense?
It does. So, my friend, could you have some thoughts on how you would make that concise?
Why don't we ask for a meeting with them with regards to this? Simple.
We can do that. The other is I re-wordsmith what our chair was saying as he was saying it, but ultimately what I wrote down is just to direct staff to follow up with MOTI staff to identify steps in securing funding for brush clearing between Alberni Valley and Parksville that would facilitate an emergency response carrying high rail up to 10 tons. Just to have the discussion.
I was pretty sure that's what Ken said. I'm only kidding, Ken. But the only thing missing, I think, would be the evaluation of the trestles. So a bit of the physical component, but again, let's not get into the weeds. But I'll stop there for a second. I've got you, Mike, and Zoran.
The reason why I like this is that it's just a discussion with staff. And at the end of the day, ministry staff don't take direction from us. So Michael Pearson is going to finish his report in early 2025. We'll get a copy of that report. This discussion with him will prompt him to say, I think that's a bad idea because, or yeah, you could do it, but maybe talk to a different ministry, or. So we'll flush out those details and come back here anyway with the response. So I don't think it distracts ministry staff from the work they have at hand. And I think our next agenda item, I'll be seeking your guidance on the alternative route in general anyway. I think what this does is just allows us to continue down this path of talking about the potential of the rail line as an alternative route at a staff level, which I think is still buffered from any political will. And we have a whole election as well. So if my discussion is fast enough, everything could change in a month anyway.
Just before I go to Mike, I think, and I would agree with John and Daniel. The only correction comment that I want to make is that we're not looking at the rail as the alternate emergency access or egress. This would be the supplement, would be to assist to help. So we absolutely still need Michael and Modi to come forward with this other report. Having said that, I'll turn it over to Michael and then I'll go to Zorn.
Thanks. So these 10-ton trucks, those are pickup trucks that go on rail and road? Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, they were around about a month or so, 2 months ago, around the valley, because I happened to see them when I walked down the road. All of a sudden, these two pickup trucks were on the railroad. Thinking, okay. I don't know how far they got. They were yeah, I don't, they came from town, they're heading out of town towards Beaver Creek and heading out to the mill. I don't know if past the mill or not, but there's couldn't got too far with the chainsaws because the brush is probably about 12 inches round. So is that the idea, is to get these things activated on the road with an eye towards the future, maybe getting something like rail back on the road? Is that the way we're gonna go here?
Yeah, regardless, the brush is the inhibitor to whatever use of that area by vehicles, and even so much so for people to pass through by foot. It's even almost too far gone for that. So clearing it allows that access. So I think there's just a myriad of possibilities to benefit from the clearing. And in terms of emergencies, yeah, having vehicles is probably the key to having this useful for emergencies. And the 10-ton trucks are several sizes up from the pickup trucks that have been going up and down to the McLean Mill. I think it was probably, actually, you might have seen Harley and I in one of the trucks. We were there recently, and it's we can't get past the McLean Mill because of the overgrown situation of it. It's not because the rail itself is a problem, it's the brush. The trestles, as has been indicated, need to be recertified to ensure that it's safe to drive a truck over those. But I have a reason to believe that they are not in a detrimental condition either.
Second, totally different question. When logging companies decide to log on either side of railroad tracks, they advise you that they're gonna go across the railroad tracks?
They should be, yeah. Anyone crossing and creating crossings need to go through our approval process to get a registered crossing. There are many unregistered crossings. We're 3 staff, so it's quite difficult to stay on top of things, but anyone creating private crossings, there's a whole protocol to follow through. And so the logging companies should be following that protocol as well.
Is there any in the valley in the last 2 years? And do you want pictures?
Yeah, I still being 5 months into the job, I'm still tuning up on my history of what's happened over the years. So, but yeah, to be aware of things is always helpful.
Thank you. Go ahead, Zoran.
I guess multiple responses to the comments and questions. I haven't heard Thomas, and maybe just confirm with me whether he needs a support for clear brush cutting. I believe you're planning to do that. If I heard you correctly, you're planning to do that anyway.
Yeah, we're hoping to work with Pishat on some clearing anyways to get their drones into map parts of the corridor. We can't map too much of it because we can't get to it. And so, and currently there is not the funds to clear the corridor. I don't know exactly how much it would cost to clear that 70-kilometer segment to Coombs. Like I said, it was 600,000 to get to Victoria to about Courtney. So it would be it wouldn't be nothing, but in terms of having access in a pretty immediate way, I think it would be pretty good value for money that either Modi or a collective of groups that stand to benefit from immediate access might be willing to participate.
Okay, because I saw this as an opportunity to support you rather than maybe hinder our process here as John's we're referring to, because we are focused on the emergency access route for on a regular basis for cars and trucks and people moving in and out. And that is I guess the focus of this committee. The idea to essentially lend the support to a rail by designating this as an alternate or really true emergency access route by high rail trucks whatever they're called. We saw this more as a benefit to you rather than necessarily muddying up the water and asking MOT for additional support. So is there a possibility that you can potentially do the assessment yourself and do the brush clearing yourself? And then we ask Moody to designate you as a secondary emergency access route.
Yeah, I think there's the definite, there's a way to make this clear and complementary, and in the context of emergency, having many different options on the table. So I don't think it needs to at all detract from any other initiatives happening. I think in particular, this has the potential to provide a tool in the toolbox much quicker, because literally, we cleared the corridor from Victoria to Courtenay in about 6 months, and that's just a team of 4. And so, in terms of if there were golly forbid, a fire on Highway 4 in the next 6 months, I think there'd be quite a problem. And this having this cutting project happen with a bit more immediacy could provide that immediate emergency access possibility, as well as, say, fire access and getting fire suppression equipment to certain places if there were to be a fire. So I think it is the possibility of some really nice low-hanging fruit that can be in complement to a broader milieu of emergency solutions in the medium and longer term.
Thanks. And that's exactly what I was maybe heading with this, Daniel. The focus is if we can maybe sort of talk to MOT as a secondary or whatever you want to call it, emergency or whatever route. Meanwhile, not sort of deviating from our original focus is what this committee is about. Is we need a solid ground, road, whatever you want to call it, emergency route for the community in case of some stoppage, whatever.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, and because I agree, the focus is we need a road, and if we can get the brush and the trestle, we can then bring in high ups, or we can bring in, to augment it if need be. The only question I have is just to check with you, Zoran, that Ken's motion, albeit we've changed it a little bit, is still appropriate to give direction to staff to speak to MOIT.
The only question I had is the money, and sorry, you mentioned 600,000, and I know the MOT or everybody, as soon as you mention money, that they stop hearing, especially if they don't have budget for it. So that's why I sort of wanted to throw this in, whether we need to mention the money in that motion. We have Island Rail Corridor Foundation. If I heard Thomas right, I'll brush clearing from Victoria to Courtenay. There could be a potential of brush clearing from Parksville to Port Alberni, and would MOT sort of designate it as such? So help Island Rail Corridor Foundation by actually providing some validity in support of revitalizing rail as a whole, rather than ask for money from the ministry. That's what was my modification to the motion that I would suggest. That's all.
So I'll turn it over to Daniel, and then we'll go to Ken after that.
Thank you. I was just going to say I wrote down what you said, because I really like the way you say it in terms of lending support to that concept, while not deterring from the fact that we still think that a permanent alternative drivable route is still our preferred community vision here. And I just like the way you said it. So I put it in my notes. It's attached to the motion as I drafted it as well. So if you're okay with that, I would just proceed. But thank you for framing it that way.
So what I'm going to suggest is that we go to Ken, Cindy, and did I see? Then we'll go to Judith, and then I would like to call the vote on the motion and start to move to the next item, because we're going to have a fair amount of discussion around the next item. So let's go with Ken, Cindy, and Judith, please.
So I guess the question is it worthwhile having rail and auto in Vancouver Island? So, I've been on the board longer than anybody. I've been there since we started in 2006. A long time to be on the board. And probably about 5 years ago, we had come to a conclusion on the board. Is it worthwhile? Or are we wasting our time? Because we put a lot of free time into that. So we decided we had some money that first thing we would do is see what kind of condition all our trestles are in. Because if we had the trestles in bad shape, we might as well forget about it because we could never afford it. So we hired the best consultants that money could hire from the United States. That's where we had to go to do a job on our trestle, to check every trestle out on the rail to see what condition they were in. And to the surprise of a lot of us, all of our trestles are made out of steel, and the steel is in good shape. The top of our trestles is wood, and some of them, need some improving. There's no doubt about it. Probably two of the trestles that really need some work are the ones at Cameron Lake. There's no doubt about that, because the foundations of them trestles need some work on them. We've known that for a long time. We weren't able to bring anything across them unless it was really lightweight. We could probably bring the lightweight transportation for cleaning brush and that type of thing across them trestles, but they're the ones that need the work. Besides that, they're good. And then we thought, you know what? This is a worthwhile thing. Let's move ahead with it. Because if we lose that transportation corridor, we'll never get it back again. It'd be the worst thing that ever happened on Vancouver Island. So we have to move ahead with it. Doesn't matter what kind of motion you have. We could have lots of different motions, but let's get on with it,
And speaking of getting on with it, let's go to Cindy and then to Judith, please.
Well, I just want to say, I totally agree with Zoran's motion, the sort of motion here, this motion that's being put together. Because I don't want to lose sight of the 600, if we're asking for money, then Moti could turn around, well, hey, you can't have both. You got to pick which one you want. And I do like the potential change. So I just wanted to echo that.
Thank you. And Judith.
I just wanted to say that I think this is a really important motion, and thank you for doing that. But I just think as far as timing is concerned, if we can clear this trail in the next 6 months and it's there and it's ready, as opposed to waiting for the permanent road, which you really need, and I really support, at least it's something that's in place. And I just wanted, I know we're all aware of that, but I just wanted to put that out there that timing is everything. And if we have a simple solution and we can work on it, we can get it done, and then at least we have that in place while we're waiting to build this permanent road.
Perfect segue into the next item. However, we are going to have a vote on the motion. Do you mind just reading what that motion might look like?
That's why you get the big one.
Here we go. To direct staff to follow up with MOTI staff to identify steps for securing funding to do brush clearing between Alberni Valley and Parksville that could facilitate up to 10-ton high rail. The side note on that is that the committee, I would express that the committee is lending support towards this, but do not see it as the official position for an alternative emergency route.
Well said, Ken. Sorry. Any comments, any questions, anyone opposed?
Yeah, Kristen is taking official notice of it. To direct staff, I could say ACRD staff to follow up with MOTI staff to identify steps to secure funding to do the brush clearing between Alberni Valley and Parksville that could facilitate up to a 10-ton high rail. Now I put in parentheses, includes assessing the bridging. And also noted that the committee lends support to this action, but does not see it as the official position for an alternative route to Highway 4.
I guess that's that last part.
Your mic, please, Harley. I can't see if it's on.
Thank you. I guess it's that last part, as the official position. And I understand that, I get that. I guess what I'm looking at is we're trying to look at alternatives, alternative routes, and the logging road was one, which, yeah, it wasn't a fun thing to do. I bought another vehicle because I wasn't prepared to travel that route with the truck I'm driving here today. And I know that the Alberni Valley Regional Airport is in discussions about expanding the length of the railway for a number of reasons. One is for the landing and ability to take off for larger aircraft. The other is for considering options for the Alberni Valley Drag Racing Association, and those are discussions only. But there are already other options being looked at and other steps to look at political support and funding for that. And I guess it's that part, official position. I guess that's the part that I don't know if it sits well with me, because we will have an official position on what the first choice is, but I'd like to think we have other options to work towards that I think are just as important and just as viable. And I'm also trying to think might be economically, perhaps more economically viable in what I'm looking at here. So I mean, I'll go along with the consensus, but I just wanted to point out that those are things that jumped out at me on this. Is this the only position? Well, I'd like to think not. This is a number of different options, and this may be a higher priority, but I wouldn't like to negate it as saying, well, no, that's not the official position. Does that make sense? Okay.
It does make sense. And I think because this is a discussion with staff, we are buffered. We're not advancing this to the ministry in a formal way. And we still have time to do all the due diligence that we have to do around both rail on the island in this valley and around all the work that we have to do with an alternative highway discussion, if we want to call it that way. So in either case, it's too soon to take any firm positions. But what the committee is saying is this is a really good idea. Prior to being in fire season where you can't cut wood, it would really be nice to have this corridor opened up just as an option. And so how would we go about securing funding for that in staff's perspective, right? And so it's for Michael to say informally to me, I think A, B, and C, whatever that might be. And I can come back and we can continue the discussion here as a committee.
Oh, okay, fair enough. That helps. And you know, the other thing is that doesn't necessarily mean that Island Corridor Foundation is locked into what direction the ACRD is going in. They are working with a number of other different regional districts, so can look at other options available with them. So I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Thank you all. Just before we call the vote, Dan, for the last, oh goodness gracious me, Marilyn, you. Just before we call the vote, we have two more speakers, then I'll call the vote. Dan and then Marilyn, please.
Yeah, just sorry, in that conversation, the last one there, I just wanted to say that I'd like to err as a committee. Transportation secondary route is our main goal, that we should err on the side of clarity, especially for staff, so that they know exactly where this committee stands. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Dan. Go ahead, Marilyn.
Also, just for clarity, I thought the beginning of the motion where you're asking staff, ACRD staff to speak with Modi staff about brush clearing, that you should also add along the island rail corridor so they know exactly what brush cutting we're talking about.
That's noted. Thank you, Marilyn, for that. I'm going to call the question. All in favor? And that's passed. Thank you very much. We're going to move on to our last item, which is request for proposal, and it's a verbal report by Daniel. But before I get to that, I want to share with you, as I was driving up from Victoria today for today's meeting, I kept hearing and seeing Ken as I'm driving up, and you know, hearing Ken talk about the many years that he has been involved in studies and discussions and more studies and more discussions. And then I was thinking of Mike down at the end of the table, and Mike and I in our profession, being firefighters, I thought, you know, how many times have we gone to a structure fire and we didn't stop at the roadside and go, well, we should have a study before we put this fire out. And it came to mind that as chair of this committee, I don't want to be meeting for the sake of meeting. I want to see us working towards a tangible goal of identifying what the alternate route is, the emergency route, not the potential permanent route. The focus in my mind is the alternate emergency route. And quite frankly, in my discussions with Daniel today, is we should have that in place before the next fire season. Not to say that there couldn't be a road slide, you know, this winter with snow and rain. But again, if you do a SWOT analysis of what could happen, it's likely it could be a wildland fire or a forest fire that shuts the road down. But bottom line is, as I said to Daniel, I want to be able to report back to our communities that we have made progress and that this is the route that has been identified as the emergency egress access. And it was furthermore reinforced when normally I drive from Banfield to Port Alberni now because of the new Banfield Road being an incredible road. Well, I got behind a slow caravan of vehicles on Sunday and decided to go the Cowichan-Yubo route, which I wished I had not done, which reinforced the fact again, we need to get the province behind establishing an appropriate route, because there's no way you're bringing commercial traffic in that route. So I won't go any further other than the fact that Daniel said this is a perfect opportunity for he to elaborate on his verbal report, and then for us to have discussion about how can we set some tangible milestones, timelines, so that we can get something in place ASAP. So with that, I'll turn it over to Daniel.
Thank you. So I think at the last meeting, we received information from the ministry, ultimately identifying the fact that they were looking at the Horn Lake Connector, the Comox Lake Connector to Cumberland, and the Banfield Road as 3 potential emergency routes, and that we could expect to have a, is that something I said? No problem. For those online, half the room just emptied out. So we can expect to have that final report from the Ministry of Transportation in likely January, February of 2025. Which leads me to ask the committee for some guidance and some dialogue around our next steps. So I have yet to put out an RFP to get some technical support, whether that be a facilitator, whether that be technical aspects to look at further details around the alternative route and or alternative highway, or lobbying. So all of these things were part of the scope of this committee. And just as a reminder, our scope included the prioritization of transportation options, to provide information back to the board in general, but also to devise a structure for advocating higher levels of government. So that's a lot of bandwidth for us. And I wanted to have some discussion today around how I could structure an RFP that the committee could support, so that we can get started on this next phase in anticipation of receiving information from the province. And the key questions I have is, do we want to focus on taking some time next year to lobby higher levels of government to get the funding to make whatever route the ministry identifies as a permanent emergency route, to have that actually occur? to make sure that that investment is there and that we can see a permanent emergency route? Do we want that to be our priority in this next phase? Do we want to make a priority to take a look and say, well, how much more would it cost to go from emergency route to a permanent route? Is that where we want to spend some time? Or is it some other level of community outreach facilitation, more business case? Do we want to build more information around impacts to the community, socioeconomic? Or do we want to develop more around the lines of any particular path creating a new economic argument or reality that the province should consider? So there's many directions for us to go in, and what I'd like to do is take this step by step. So rather than do an everything RFP that we likely won't have enough money for, I was really hoping that I could get the wisdom of this group to say, like, what's the next step that would be a good RFP to get started and to release, knowing that between now and then, we probably have an opportunity to go back to the board and talk about our vision for 2025. And if that requires a bit more budget, we can have that appropriate discussion there too. That is my verbal report and more of a sequence of questions. I see John has got his hand up.
What a surprise. So I really agree with you, what you said, Daniel. I think we need a focused response to whatever gets put on the table and an action plan. And an example of how the wheels have fallen off sort of the direction that has been that of the community is Cathedral Grove, with a complete plan that they had architecturally, everything. The ministry had it all done. And the provincial government said, no, we're not doing that. We haven't got the money to do that. So I think with this group that we've got really has some of the best lobbyists available for this cause. We got two mayors and the city of Port Alberni and the regional district to spearhead that focus and that commitment to the provincial government that this needs to be done. We need to have solid locked in funding, and we need a very focused time frame. Because if we get another incident, whether it be an earthquake, some sort of what do they call it now? The storm. What we used to call it the monsoon, but we don't call it that anymore. Atmospheric river. We get another atmospheric river that brings stuff down and closes the road, and then we're back at square one. So we've got the group. They're great at it. We just have to get our message together and present it to whoever's going to be government in the next go round. We're not sure that things happen. So, but it has to happen, and we have to be ready for whatever.
Thanks, John. I have Cindy, Zoran, and Levana.
Well, John, certainly the city has been working on that, especially at the UBCM. We did meet with the transportation minister, and they're very much aware of Cathedral Grove. It's definitely on their radar, and we'll see what happens out of those plans. We've talked about emergency routes. We talked about a business plan for a permanent route out of the highway, another route out of the Port Alberni, and they're very much aware of all that too. We're just waiting for the report. The minister does know about the report that I thought was coming at the end of December. That's disappointing. It's January. I'm one that likes it done now, right? And also we talked about, well, maybe we need to look at a business plan to have another an alternate permanent route out of the community. So so we are working on it in that sense. And I don't know about the West Coast mayors and the ACRD. I don't believe there was a meeting, Daniel, with the ministers at that time. So anyways, I just wanted to bring that forward. Next steps for me here is I would really like to see what Moti comes out with on in January. And it's really hard to plan next steps till you know exactly what the next steps are from their report. And that's what, for me, that it's hard in that sense. Sure, I would like to look for money and definitely like to go, let's just do it. But until we know what their thoughts are, which is really the most important component of this whole thing right now, you know, moving forward, other than us getting out of our community. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Cindy. Zoran.
And Daniel, just maybe for clarity, right now, we don't have to do nothing. We are waiting for a ministry to provide a report, and they're going to provide 3 emergency routes emergency routes from out of Port Alberni, and that's on them right now at this point. So to me, and I would echo what Cindy has said, is I think it's important, very much important as well, to essentially let them do their job, come up with the emergency route. At that point, I would assume we would sit and vote on those 3 emergency routes, which one we prefer, and then continue to have that prepared and ready. And based on that report, in my opinion, I think we should look at next steps for ourselves, like Cindy alluded. What will be alternate route out of Port Alberni, or does the emergency route we focus on emergency route becoming an alternate route and make it permanent? So to me, I think it would be, at this point, the way I see it, sit and wait for the report to come out.
Thank you, Zoran. And Levana.
Thanks. Maybe this question will be better answered after we get the reports, but I was wondering to follow up on an item that may or may not have been brought up in a couple meetings ago. It sounds like we're going in the same direction of that conversation when I hear business plan and banding together and lobbying. Is, are we interested in doing something that looks like an MOU and memorandum of understanding between all of us to really solidify our cohesion and direction and our motives? So when we do start lobbying, that would be a really strong, grounded way to lobby and persuade and say that we're all together and going in this direction for these specific items, whether it be, and it sounds like we still have to filter out what exactly do we want to focus on and how do we lobby for what we're looking for, whether it be high rail or specifically emergency routes that are better, just in a better state right now. That's my question, and yeah.
Thank you. I'll get Daniel to respond. Just before he does, I couldn't agree more that there are so many stakeholders involved in this, and the only way to move forward is to have collaboration and agreement. But anyway, I'll turn it over to Daniel. Thank you, Levana.
That really is an excellent comment, and you did bring that up in the past, I do remember, and I don't think we ever actioned anything. Well, I know I didn't action anything yet in terms of establishing an MOU. I think this is partially why I wanted to have the discussion that we're having today, is that if so let's just say that part of our next steps work plan was to wait to see what the ministry comes back with. We know it's going to be a preference for one of 3 different routes. We'll likely have some discussion around it, and then we'll want to build some cohesion around which one, like, do we agree with whatever one they prioritize? If we do, why? If we don't, why? And what would the alternative be? We know that there's going to be some time spent in terms of building that cohesion, and I think it's extremely wise to build that as an MOU, both between communities and agencies, right? Because this is the constitution of this committee is very much a reflection of the people we'd want to be working with to lobby higher levels of government. But I'll take a step back from that, is that in the process of doing this, if I posted an RFP, I would post it likely the end of next week. It would likely be open for a month. which takes us into the end of November. We'd have the opportunity for proponents to reach out, ask questions. I would put out an addendum for clarity, likely reach out to this committee if there's any things that stump me that I want to make sure we're all clear on. So then we'd be early November and talking about a review of different proponents. I would likely do a review and come back and mid-November, we have another committee meeting to check in and say, what do you think? This is my recommendation. Have I missed anything? And this committee would have the opportunity to provide some feedback there. And then we'd likely be going to the board in early December to say, this is what we'd like to award. Now, in doing so, by moving on an RFP now, what we're doing is really setting ourselves up for a January start, which is when we anticipate receiving the report. And this is why I think it's timely, because if we wait until the report comes in January, February, we'll be March or April by the time we get somebody secured and we're ready to move forward. So we will have missed the whole first quarter of 2025, which then really makes it hard to be ready for summer or even better September of 2025 when the next UBCM is. And that's when we'd probably want a whole contingent of us going to talk to Victoria and reinforce our message. So I'm just thinking timeline wise, it would be useful to, if not now, then at least some point in October, pull the trigger on moving forward with an RFP. And what I'm hearing so far in the feedback is that definitely the business case for lobbying the higher level of government and for making sure that we have a memorandum of understanding, a unified vision here are the next actions. So I'll put that back as that's what I'm hearing. Is that right?
I'll go to John, then I'll go to Cindy, then I'll go to Zoran.
I'm just kind of worried about our jurisdiction as an advisory committee and how forceful and effective we can be, knowing that we're a child of the regional district and that we basically have to have the voice of the regional district as the voice. I just, where are we there?
Through the chair, excellent question, and that's why I revisited the roles of this committee, and part of our role is the advancement of advocating to higher levels of government. So it's within the scope for us to flesh out and prepare that business case or that business plan. No contract will be awarded without circling back to the board, which is part of the timelines in the due process. And in my report to the board, when we circle back, I will remind them of their resolutions that gave staff the ability and a budget. We do have a budget to work with this year as well. And we haven't really done much with that budget because really the province took the appropriate lead. And so here we are in the final quarter of the year, and I've yet to spend some real money. So I'd like to get started on that because I do have the budget.
Cindy.
Okay, so a business case or a business plan. So in an RFP, if we put one out, so how, okay, I'm trying to figure out. We don't know which is going to, the mode is going to come up with, if it's going to be Horn Lake or whichever route. So to put an RFP out, why are we putting an RFP out? What do we want to see? What do we hope to get, out of that RFP without seeing what they're coming up with? If we start going, oh, well, we take these 3 routes and start thinking, okay, what if it's one of these we want, right? But that's not what they are suggesting. So we're going to be a waste of time of staff and everybody. Do you follow where I'm going with that? I need a clearer picture on this, what you're asking.
Through the chair, great comment and observation. And the way I would envision this is we'd be putting out an RFP stating background, and also sharing the work that has been done and is yet to be completed. So we'd be saying that we are working with the ministry on a scenario that contemplates one of 3 possible permanent emergency routes. And that ultimately we'd be looking for a party with experience in lobbying higher levels of government to help review the information that is received when it's released by the province, to help facilitate dialogue with all of our interested parties and communities to ensure that the preferred route that ends up being identified can be agreed upon by all parties, and then to develop an action plan for lobbying the higher levels of government to get that funding in place to see this ultimate route implemented. So I would be seeking the expertise to build it, knowing that we do not yet have all the information. And it's not foreign territory for many organizations, and nor is it bad to say like the rubber's going to hit the road in January of 2025. But we have some prep work to do, and many of these companies would likely want to come in and facilitate a meeting with each of one of us, probably do some one-on-ones with various communities that want to talk to Ucluelet, Tofino, to the chamber, just to make sure that we're clear on the values that are in there, because they would start preparing the framework of how it is that we would achieve alignment, because we all agree in principle at this table today, but when we start talking about the devil in the detail, right, there might be some principles that are different, and that may split the group apart. And so using a firm to help build that consensus, draft an MOU, and do that work is what I'd be looking for, because I don't have staff to turn to that. And as Levana appropriately indicated, that consensus via an MOU is extremely important.
Okay, so almost like a consultant putting it all together. Okay, so, and my wish and hope that MOTI, or the provincial, which is provincial government, is going to fund it. You know, like do the roads, get everything up to par. I mean, that's where my thoughts are. I don't want to fund it. They're the ones need that second access out.
And through the chair, my discussions with ministry staff is they will make a recommendation. But beyond that, they have absolutely no leverage to convincing the ministry and the minister that recommendation is more important than what Harrison Hot Springs might be talking about, or what somewhere else in the province might be talking about. And I think this is where the lobbying effort for us is so important, because we want to make sure that whatever ministry, whatever decision makers are there looking at the province, we want ours to be on the top of the pile in terms of funding. And that is not ministry staff's role. So what we want to do is right away complement what they're doing by saying yes. And by the way, here's all of us saying yes, not just Port Alberni, not just the Nuu-Chah-Nulth, not just Tofino. It's all of us, and it's an important message for the government to receive, regardless of whether there's a change or not. And it's beyond the scope of what ministry staff can do.
No, I'm going to go to Spazarin, Mike, Harry, and then. Oh, well.
Great, thank you. So I think it is a good idea to move forward, Daniel. I appreciate the fact that you're trying to move forward on this. I do think that we want to be very clear about what the RFP includes. So it's all of the strategic considerations we've already discussed so far. Is this part, for starting with the largest context, which is this part of a larger strategic plan for transportation on the island, which would include a central island highway? Would that be part of it? Or the social considerations, environmental considerations? Going to the more technical aspects, who owns the real estate that these different routes go on? What are the topography? What are the geohazards, landslides, avalanches, debris flows, flood areas, seismic hazards, structures? What are the structures that would need to be created in terms of bridges, water crossings, different kinds of retaining walls, tunnels, those kinds of things. So I think my point would be we want to make this as clear as possible, so that we kind of hit all the targets that we've been talking about up to this point.
Yes, noted, and thank you. I'm going to continue typing.
Thank you. We've got Zoran, Mike, Marilyn, and then John for a motion.
Daniel, I think you made a strong argument. I'm very much in support. I think you are making a lot of sense by doing the prep work in anticipation of report coming out, which is a lot, and I think your approach is very sound, and I think in my opinion you should move forward, and I will wait for John to make a motion, which I think will be in line. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do see you, Dan, so I'll get you just before John. Mike, please.
Thank you. So I know you want to get going. This is a good idea to get going. So mine is jurisdiction, because if we're going to get a road out of here, it has to go through somebody else's regional district of some sort. So although we can get going on this and get somebody in play, are we going to encompass the other jurisdictions and see what they're going to put forward on their costing side? Because it's going to benefit them too. It shouldn't be only us looking at paying a consultant to do good for both sides. We should equal the pain and equal the results if we can. So is that going to be part of the process moving forward to get things going?
Excellent observation, and I'm pleased to say yes. One of the benefits of UBCM and even all the other meetings that we actually do share right now on the island amongst regional districts is that James for the Courtney Comox Regional District, Danielle for the Cowichan Regional District. These are points of discussion for all of us. So no one knows where the province is going to pop out with a recommendation. Both have various comments around either route, but I can confidently say that we do have an open line of communication, and that part of this would have to be that ongoing dialogue with where this route goes at the end of the day. So those are important considerations, and I'll make sure that is part of the RFP as well.
One more real quick follow-up. So if we do this now and get it going in January, hopefully we can persuade one of the regional districts to put it in their budget for 2025 and not lose a whole year on this process.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you. I just wanted to show my support for your train of thought, Daniel. I think it's really important to be proactive on this project and get the RFP out so that we have a proponent chosen at the time that we get the report from Modi in January, and that will get the wheels in motion, so to speak.
Thank you, Marilyn. Dan?
Yeah, I just wanted to just bring up the Northwestern BC Resource Benefit Alliance. They work for 10 years, many communities together, and we're finally successful early this year in getting a $250 million over 5 years for their communities. They used I believe they used a firm that was quite successful in getting everybody together in one voice and being very consistent in pressuring the government in appropriate ways. So I know it's possible. I think it's going to be really important who gets the job, and then once that happens, that we all do agree that we're all on the same page and move as one voice and be fairly consistent and fairly I don't know, a lot of pressure on the government. So every chance we get, that's all I want to say. If anybody wants to look that up, they were quite successful and something similar to what we are approaching, although with differences.
Thanks, Dan. I'm sure John will do that. Just one clarification for me before I turn it over to John for a motion. Levana made a really good point, as we all acknowledged, about making sure that we're consulting with the various stakeholders, that we have a collaborative approach, and that we're checking with everyone, including I think you might have used the word industry, Daniel. But I think to be proactive, we should be working on, our staff should be working on putting that list together for this committee to review to ensure that we have everybody in place, because the RFP, I think that's that could be a difficult, onerous job for the consultant, who better knows the folks than the folks around the table and on Zoom. So that's the only thing that I think we should be proactively starting to work on as an item to bring back to this committee for review. And with that, John patiently waiting with this amazing motion.
I would like to make an amazing motion. So I would move that we instruct staff to develop an RFP to support us going forward in providing a secondary route to the Alberni Valley. And that the considerations be the primary considerations being to focus on inclusion and participation by all of the groups that are affected by the lack of a secondary route, and primarily First Nations. I think First Nations as a group have suffered rather quietly through what we went through, and I think their voice is a voice that the government hears very clearly.
Thank you, John. I'm just going to ask for clarification. It's an emergency access route rather than an alternate route.
I think a secondary route gives us the freedom of developing whatever it can be.
Yeah.
It is a secondary route. Emergency route is developed by MOTs, that's right. And we are looking for secondary route, which may become same as emergency. That's my understanding, is that right?
We can definitely use that.
Perfect. Excellent. Can I have someone second that, please? Seconded by Cindy. You weren't quite fast enough, Soren. Seconded by. Yeah. Seconded by Cindy. Any comments, questions regarding that motion? Then go ahead, Cindy.
Just so you know, it's not just us in this area that were affected. It's the whole island was affected, because the businesses that I talked to that are south, they really were affected by not doing business in the community. So it's the whole island in the long run.
Excellent. So with that, I will call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. With that, we have no late business. Kristen, is there any questions from the Zoom?
No, there are no questions in the Zoom or in the responses email.
Okay. I'm looking around the table, especially at you, Daniel, with respect to next meeting. And I recognize that December is a tough month to meet because of Christmas. But maybe, perhaps I could suggest that in your conversations with Mr. Pearson, you could kind of nail down when the report is going to be tabled, and set up the next meeting for immediately following the issuance of that report.
If I may as well, as part of the RFP process, I may actually want to come back to this committee towards the end of November. I think it would be a really good discussion to see who's responded. I'll still ask for all the information from the ministry, but I know it's a quick turnaround, but the November might really be a useful, even if it's a short one agenda item meeting, to confirm that we're happy with everything, and if there's any concerns, I can add them to questions or help amend the contract that would cover any gaps that we're worried about.
Thank you. Well, based on my comments earlier about let's get on with this, does anybody object to a meeting in the very near future, whether it's late November or even early December? I'm not seeing anyone opposed. I mean, folks can zoom in if they would so like. If that's the case, then that would be fine. Excellent. With that, then, could I have a motion to adjourn? Cindy, and seconded by Mike. Thank you all for those who are joining us online. Thank you all for those that made it in. Great job to staff and to yourself, Daniel. Thank you very much. Safe travels wherever you're heading back. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.